The director of the FBI watched his wife die a little more each day in one of America's top hospitals. 20 senior physicians had failed. Her mystery illness was a ticking clock, until a first-week medical intern saw a single line in the blood work everyone else had scanned over: the signature of a rare, lethal toxin. Her name was Sarah Walker. She was 23 years old on her fourth day of a medical internship, staring at a lab result that should not exist. The toxin was aconitine, derived from a poisonous plant called monkshood. In a civilian hospital, its presence meant only one thing: this wasn't a disease, it was an attack. And when Sarah reported her finding, she set in motion a protocol that would bring the full weight of the federal government crashing into the hospital within the hour. To understand how 20 experts could miss a poisoning, you have to understand the case they thought they were treating. Margaret Thorne, age 54, was admitted 8 days earlier with severe gastrointestinal distress and erratic heart rhythms. The symptoms were textbook for a dozen common illnesses, and every test for those came back negative. The leading theory became a rare autoimmune disorder, a medical zebra, but they were hunting the wrong animal. The hospital was Johns Hopkins, a name synonymous with medical excellence. The team assembled was a who's who of internal medicine, cardiology, and neurology. They ran advanced panels, genetic screenings, and exploratory scopes. Each day, Margaret deteriorated. Her heart would stabilize, then plunge into dangerous arrhythmias. Her neurological function began to flicker, tingling in her extremities, moments of confusion. It was a cascade of system failures with no unifying cause. Sarah Walker entered this wall of expertise as a ghost. Her job was to fetch charts, run basic labs, and stay out of the way. On her fourth day, she was tasked with compiling all of Margaret Thorne's blood work into a single timeline for a diagnostic review. It was clerical work, meant to keep the intern busy. But Sarah had a habit, drilled into her in medical school, of looking at the raw data, not just the summary notes. That's when she saw the anomaly. It was in a comprehensive metabolic panel from day 3. One value for serum potassium was flagged as critically high. The note from the attending read, "Likely hemolyzed sample, discard." A hemolyzed sample means the red blood cells broke in the tube, skewing the result. It's common. They drew new blood and the next potassium was normal. Case closed. But Sarah noticed the pattern. The discarded high potassium was surrounded by other subtler shifts: a slightly low magnesium, a borderline calcium. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a fingerprint her pharmacology textbook had called the cardiotoxic triad. It was a hallmark of specific poisons that attack the heart's electrical system, poisons like digoxin or monkshood. She pulled the toxicology report. It was a standard screen, checking for opioids, benzodiazepines, cocaine, and common drugs of abuse. It was negative. Aconitine, the active toxin in monkshood, is not on any standard hospital drug screen. You have to look for it specifically. No one had, because no one had any reason to suspect it. Sarah took her compiled timeline and the flagged panel to the chief resident. He glanced at it for 3 seconds. "It's a bad sample," he said. "We already ruled out toxicity. The family confirmed no access to strange plants, no history of self-harm. Focus on your actual duties." The dismissal was absolute. In the hierarchy of a teaching hospital, an intern's hunch against 20 specialists is less than noise. But the numbers wouldn't leave her. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Sarah logged back into the hospital system from her apartment. She researched aconitine poisoning case studies. The symptoms matched Margaret Thorne's with terrifying precision: nausea, vomiting, paralysis starting in the limbs, life-threatening cardiac arrhythmias that come and go. The poison works in waves as the body metabolizes it. Treatment is possible if caught early, with drugs to support the heart and activated charcoal to bind any remaining toxin in the gut. After 8 days, without treatment, the mortality rate exceeds 90%. She also found the delivery method. Aconitine is rapidly absorbed through the mucous membranes. It doesn't need to be swallowed. It could be administered in food, drink, or even by touching it to the lips. The next morning, Sarah went over the chief resident's head. She waited outside the office of Dr. Aris Thorne, the patient's husband. She didn't know he was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She only knew he was a man watching his wife die. When he stepped out, eyes hollow with exhaustion, she introduced herself and showed him the printouts. "I think someone is poisoning your wife," she said. "With a plant toxin called monkshood. The tests have been looking for the wrong thing." Dr. Thorne stared at her, then at the papers. His expression didn't change, but the air in the corridor did. It went cold and still. "Explain it to me," he said, his voice low. She did, pointing to the pattern in the labs. When she finished, he asked one question. "How certain are you?" Sarah swallowed. "Medically, 70%, but if I'm right, we have maybe hours to try a treatment protocol." Aris Thorne didn't go to the chief of medicine. He pulled out a secure phone and made a single call. That call bypassed the entire hospital administration and went directly to the FBI's laboratory division in Quantico, Virginia, and to the Strategic Information and Operations Center in Washington. The protocol was immediate and invisible. At 11:17 a.m., the hospital's head of security, a former DC police captain, received an encrypted message. It contained a case number and 2 words: "Silent lockdown." This isn't a standard lockdown for an active shooter. No alarms sound. No announcements are made. Instead, security personnel discreetly secure all external doors and stairwells. Elevators are taken offline. The movement of people is subtly funneled and observed. The goal is to freeze the scene without causing panic. At 11:23, a black SUV with government plates pulled into the ambulance bay. 3 men in dark suits entered, flashing badges to the security desk. They were not local agents. They were from the Counterintelligence Division. They went straight to the lab and impounded every physical sample of Margaret Thorne's blood, tissue, and bodily fluids taken over the last 8 days. They also seized the original testing machine's internal data logs. By 11:40, the chief of medicine, Dr. Robert Evans, was summoned to a conference room. He expected to see hospital administrators. Instead, he faced 2 federal agents and a pale, furious Aris Thorne. The agents laid out Sarah's hypothesis. Dr. Evans, a man used to being the ultimate authority in his domain, initially scoffed. "This is a fantasy from a sleep-deprived intern," he argued. "We have considered and ruled out toxicology." One of the agents slid a tablet across the table. "We just got a preliminary result from Quantico on the day 3 serum sample. Using liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, they detected aconitine alkaloids at a concentration of 4.2 nanograms per milliliter." He looked at Dr. Evans. "That's a lethal dose, doctor. Would you like to reconsider your diagnosis?" The room seemed to tilt. Dr. Evans's face drained of color. The medical failure was catastrophic, but the criminal implication was worse. Someone had administered a deadly, undetectable poison to the FBI director's wife inside a secured hospital ward, and that person had been doing it successfully for over a week. The directive from Aris Thorne was simple, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "Every person who has had any contact with my wife's room, her food, her medication, or her lab work in the last 10 days is now a person of interest. Nurses, doctors, janitors, nutritionists, lab techs. No one leaves. No one touches anything. You will provide full access to security footage, staff schedules, and visitor logs. Your cooperation is not a request." And so, at the moment of her greatest professional discovery, Sarah Walker found herself at the center of a federal investigation. She was no longer just the intern. She was the sole witness who had pierced the veil. She was also, as the agents quickly realized, the only person outside the FBI who knew the truth. As she was led to a secure office to give her full statement, she looked down the crowded hallway at the scared, confused faces of the hospital staff, the brilliant surgeons, the seasoned nurses, the busy technicians. One of them, she now understood, was a murderer, and that murderer now knew that Sarah was the one who had uncovered them. The secure office was a converted patient room on an otherwise empty administrative floor. Two agents sat across from Sarah. Their questions weren't about medicine. They were about access. Who had she told about her theory before speaking to Director Thorne? Did anyone see her compiling the data? Had she received any unusual messages or felt she was being watched? Sarah's mind raced. She had told the chief resident who dismissed her. She had logged in from her apartment, and she had been alone in the charting room for hours. Just the chief resident, she said, and I worked from home last night. The agents exchanged a glance. One made a note. The home network login created a digital timestamp. If the poisoner had any access to the hospital's IT audit logs, they could have seen her accessing Margaret Thorne's full history from an external IP address in the middle of the night. She had painted a target on her own back. Meanwhile, in the hospital's central lab, a different kind of investigation was underway. An FBI forensic toxicologist, flown in from Quantico, was working alongside a silent lab tech. They were running the seized blood samples through a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, the gold standard for identifying unknown compounds. The machine hummed, plotting a graph of molecular weights against retention times. The peak for aconitine was unmistakable, but the toxicologist noticed something else. The concentration wasn't consistent. In the first 2 days, the toxin was barely detectable. On day 3, it spiked, the same sample with the high potassium. Then it dipped. Then on day 5 and again on day 7, it spiked higher. This wasn't a single, massive dose. This was a series of administrations. The poisoner wasn't trying to kill Margaret Thorne quickly. They were trying to make it look like a progressive, mysterious illness. They were dosing her to keep her in the gray zone between life and death, where every test would be confusing and every treatment ineffective. This changed the profile entirely. A crime of passion involves one violent act. This was an act of sustained, calculated torture requiring continued access. The suspect pool shrank from hundreds to a handful, only those with recurring, unchallenged access to the patient's immediate environment. Primary nurses, the attending physician, the nutrition aide who delivered meals, the phlebotomist who drew blood. Downstairs, the silent lockdown was breeding chaos. Nurses scheduled to go home after a 12-hour shift were told they couldn't leave. Doctors with afternoon surgeries were informed their cases were postponed. No explanation was given beyond an internal security matter. Rumors began to fly: a missing infant, a radioactive spill, a terrorist threat. The presence of grim-faced men in suits with earpieces did nothing to calm nerves. In the intensive care unit, a new protocol was initiated. Under the supervision of an FBI medic, a treatment for aconitine poisoning was finally started. They administered activated charcoal through a nasogastric tube, though it was likely too late to absorb much. They began intravenous lidocaine to stabilize the heart's electrical activity. The medical team, now fully aware of the truth, worked with a new, horrifying precision. They weren't fighting a disease anymore. They were fighting a weapon. Director Eris Thorne stood outside the glass, watching. His face was a mask, but his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. His wife was the victim, but his professional mind was already analyzing the attack vector. Aconitine. Not a street drug, not a common household poison. It required knowledge to obtain and to prepare. The root of the monkshood plant must be dried, ground, and processed to extract the alkaloid. It wasn't something you bought on a corner. This pointed to preparation. This pointed to premeditation stretching back weeks or months. His secure phone vibrated. It was an update from the team reviewing security footage. They had identified 73 distinct staff members who entered Margaret's room over the 8-day period. They were cross-referencing those faces with employment records, access logs to the pharmacy and supply rooms, and background checks. It was a mountain of data. They needed a break. Back in the secure office, Sarah finished her statement. One agent, whose name tag read Vasquez, leaned forward. The chief resident you spoke to, Dr. Pendleton, described the interaction. Sarah did, his dismissiveness, his hurry. Did he look at the papers you showed him? Actually look? Briefly, Sarah said, maybe 3 seconds. Did he touch them? Yes, he took them from me, glanced, handed them back. Agent Vasquez made another note. And after he handed them back, what did you do with those papers? I put them in my folder, then I went back to the nursing station. A cold realization dripped down Sarah's spine. You think he might have contaminated them? We think, Vasquez said carefully, that if he is involved, he now knew exactly what evidence you had gathered. He could have taken steps. Just then the door opened. A third agent beckoned Vasquez outside. Through the crack in the door, Sarah heard a fragment of hushed conversation. Found in the soil, outside her window, the door closed. Minutes later, Vasquez returned, his expression grave. We need you to look at something. He led Sarah not back into the hospital, but to a service elevator that went down to the basement laundry and maintenance level. They walked through a labyrinth of piping and ducts to a small, dank room housing the hospital's indoor landscaping supplies. Bags of potting soil, small trees in containers, gardening tools. On a metal shelf beside a watering can was a small clay pot. In it grew a slender plant with dark green, glossy leaves and a spike of deep purple, hood-shaped flowers. Monkshood, Aconitum napellus. It was healthy, recently watered. The botanical name tag is still in the soil, Vasquez said. This isn't a wild plant. It was cultivated here. The room is unlocked. Hundreds of staff have access. Sarah stared at the beautiful, deadly flowers. So the poison was made here, inside the hospital. Or it was grown here to throw us off, Vasquez replied. But it means our subject has botanical knowledge, or wants us to think they do. The discovery created a frantic new thread. Agents began pulling personnel records for anyone with gardening hobbies, biology degrees, or prior employment in plant nurseries. The list was surprisingly long. Hospital staff, it turned out, included many with green thumbs. As the afternoon wore on, the pressure inside the building reached a boiling point. A cardiac surgeon, furious his triple bypass operation was canceled, confronted a security guard and was promptly detained. A group of nurses demanded union representation. The hospital administration, led by a pale and sweating Dr. Evans, was trying to manage a mutiny while simultaneously hiding the fact that a serial poisoner might be on staff. At 5 p.m., the forensic team made another discovery. While reviewing the logs from the automated medication dispensing system on Margaret's floor, they found an anomaly. On 4 separate occasions, the cabinet registered an override to access a specific drawer, the one containing emergency cardiac drugs like atropine and epinephrine. The overrides were performed using a master nursing supervisor code. But the security camera covering that cabinet had been malfunctioning, its lens deliberately smeared with a dab of grease, for the entire period of Margaret's hospitalization. Someone with a high-level access code had been at the cabinet, unobserved, at times corresponding with the spikes in toxin levels. They weren't taking the emergency drugs. The cabinet was just feet from the clean utility room where patient drinking water and supplies were kept. It was the perfect cover. The master code belonged to Alina Shaw, the night shift nursing supervisor, a 30-year veteran of the hospital, known for her ironclad competence and no-nonsense demeanor. Agents located her in a break room, drinking coffee and reading a novel, seemingly unperturbed by the lockdown. When asked about the overrides, she frowned. That's impossible. I haven't used my code for an override on that floor in months. The system must be glitching. But when agents checked the login location data, it showed the overrides were performed from a workstation physically located on Margaret's ward. Someone had used her code on that floor. Either Shaw was lying, or her credentials had been stolen. The focus tightened around Alina Shaw. Agents began a full background check, pulling her financials, phone records, and personal history. They also quietly pulled Sarah from the secure office and moved her to a new location, a vacant doctor's sleep room on a different floor. It's a precaution, Agent Vasquez told her. until we understand the full picture. Alone in the small, dark room, Sarah's medical mind wouldn't quit. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit. A nursing supervisor with a stolen code, a poison plant in a basement, a sophisticated, slow-dosing regimen, and a victim who was the wife of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. The motive felt off. If you wanted to kill the FBI director's wife, a single, massive dose of aconitine would look like a heart attack. This drawn-out method guaranteed an investigation. It was as if the poisoner wanted to be discovered. That's when she remembered the lab work from other patients. During her all-night research session, she had, out of sheer habit, pulled the lab trends for the other 3 patients in the same cardiac intensive care unit as Margaret Thorne. She had been looking for patterns, for anything else that seemed unusual. One patient, a 70-year-old man recovering from valve surgery, had also had a transient, unexplained spike in liver enzymes. It was attributed to a medication reaction. Another, a middle-aged woman with myocarditis, had a sudden, brief episode of low platelets. At the time, they were unrelated blips. Now, they screamed at her. What if Margaret Thorne wasn't the only target? What if the poisoner was using the chaos of a busy ICU to test doses, to refine their method, or to mask their primary intention? She had to tell someone. She reached for the room phone, but it was dead. Her personal cell phone had no signal. The FBI had likely deployed a localized jammer. She was isolated. The only way out was the door. She cracked it open. The hallway was empty, eerily quiet. The usual hospital bustle was absent. The lockdown had cleared the non-essential areas. She could hear distant, muffled voices from around a corner. Sarah made a decision. She needed to get to the main lab, to the patient record system. She needed to check those other charts. She slipped out and moved quickly down the corridor, her sneakers silent on the linoleum. She took a service stairwell, her heart pounding in her ears. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every distant footfall made her freeze. She reached the main lab floor and peered through the small window in the stairwell door. The lab was still active, with a few techs working under the watch of an armed federal agent. She couldn't walk in there, but she remembered another way. During her orientation, they'd shown the medical interns a backup charting station in the old medical records library, a room that was rarely used since everything went digital. It had a terminal with full system access. The library was in the hospital's original wing, a section of quieter offices and archives. The lights were dimmed. As she approached the door, she saw it was slightly ajar. A faint glow came from within. Someone was already in there. She leaned closer, listening. She heard the soft click-clack of a keyboard, then a voice, low and strained, speaking on a phone. "It's unraveling. They found the plant. They're pulling Shaw's records now. No, I don't think she'll hold up under interrogation. The intern is the problem. She's the only one who saw it. Without her, it's just circumstantial." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It was Dr. Aris Thorne. The voice was unmistakable. Dr. Aris Thorne, the director of the FBI, the grieving husband, on the phone, speaking not like a victim but like a man managing a crisis that was slipping out of control. Sarah froze, her hand still on the doorframe, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to unhear what she had just heard. She backed away silently, each step careful on the old tile. Her mind fragmented into competing realities. 1. The man she had trusted with her discovery was part of the plot to kill his own wife. 2. Everything she had done since that moment, every piece of information she had given the FBI, every detail of her statement, had gone directly to the architect of the crime. 3. She was now the primary loose end he needed to tie up. The hallway felt like a tunnel with no exit. She couldn't go back to the safe room. That was their location for her. She couldn't approach any of the agents. They were his agents. The hospital was in lockdown, but the jailer had just become the primary threat. Her medical training kicked in, overriding panic. Assess, prioritize. Her priority was no longer helping the FBI solve the case. It was surviving the next hour and proving her theory to someone, anyone, outside Thorne's circle. The other patient lab anomalies were her only tangible thread. She needed to access the record system from a terminal that wasn't being monitored. She remembered the outpatient clinic on the second floor. It was closed for the evening, but during her first day tour, they'd mentioned it had independent network access. It was a long shot, but it was away from the central drama. She moved back to the stairwell, climbing now, her ears straining for any sound from above or below. Reaching the clinic door, she found it locked. A keycard panel glowed beside it. She had a basic intern card, but it only opened educational spaces. In desperation, she pulled the fire alarm cover off the wall further down the corridor, revealing a master key taped behind it, an open secret among the night shift staff for when they needed supplies. She swiped it. The light turned green. Inside, the clinic was dark and still. The glow from a dozen dormant computer screens provided the only light. She sat at the nearest terminal, woke it up, and logged in with her credentials. Her access was limited, but she could still view lab results. She pulled up the records for the other 3 patients in the cardiac intensive care unit from the past 2 weeks. The 70-year-old valve surgery patient, Mr. Henderson. His liver enzyme spike was isolated, but when she looked at his full metabolic panel from that same day, she saw it. A slight, clinically insignificant elevation in his creatinine, a marker of kidney stress, a common post-surgical finding. But the pattern of the liver and kidney values together formed a different picture, a mild, systemic insult. The middle-aged woman with myocarditis, Ms. Garrity. The brief platelet drop. Sarah dug deeper into the woman's coagulation studies. There was a corresponding, tiny prolongation of her prothrombin time, another subtle hint of a blood system disturbance. Then she looked at the 4th bed, which had been occupied by a patient discharged 3 days before Margaret Thorne was admitted. A 45-year-old man treated for a severe, unexplained arrhythmia that resolved spontaneously. His discharge diagnosis was idiopathic ventricular tachycardia, a fancy term for "we don't know what caused it." Sarah pulled his toxicology screen. It was the standard panel, negative. But buried in his nursing notes was a single line from a night nurse. Patient reports bitter taste in mouth after evening medication. Requested different juice. The note was marked as addressed with no follow-up. 3 patients, 3 different minor unexplained physiological blips that were each attributed to something else: surgery, underlying disease, idiosyncratic reaction. But to Sarah, viewing them together, they formed a constellation. Aconitine caused gastrointestinal distress, cardiac chaos, and neurological symptoms. But in sublethal testing doses, it could manifest as isolated system disruptions. A test of the liver here, a tweak of coagulation there, a quick run of arrhythmia somewhere else. The poisoner hadn't been practicing. They had been calibrating. They were using the ICU as a live laboratory to understand dosage and timing before deploying the full protocol on their primary target. Margaret Thorne was the final experiment. Sarah's hands trembled as she typed, compiling the data into a single document. She needed to get this out. She inserted a USB drive she used for medical school lectures into the computer. As the file transferred, a shadow fell across the doorway. "You shouldn't be in here." Sarah jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. It was Agent Vasquez. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the gloom. I was looking for a quiet place," she stammered, her hand hovering near the mouse, trying to close the screens without ejecting the drive. "Your safe location was moved. We've been looking for you." He didn't move closer. "It's not safe to wander. Come with me." Every word from the library echoed in her head. The intern is the problem. She's the only one who saw it. If she went with him, she'd be walking straight into Thorne's custody. She had to know whose side Vasquez was on. "Director Thorne," she said, watching his face carefully. "Is he with his wife?" Vasquez's eyes narrowed just a fraction, a micro-expression of confusion. "He's coordinating the investigation from the command post." "Why?" The reaction seemed genuine. He didn't know, or he was a very good actor. "I need to show you something," Sarah said, deciding to gamble. She turned the monitor toward him, pointing to her compiled data. "I think Margaret Thorne was not the first victim. I think the poisoner tested their method on other patients in this same ICU. These lab anomalies are signatures of sublethal exposure." Vasquez stepped into the room and studied the screen. His demeanor shifted from security to investigator. "You can prove this." "Not prove, not yet, but the pattern is there. It means the subject has had access for weeks, not days. It means they're methodical, not impulsive. And it means—" She took a breath. "It means they might not stop with one high-profile target." He was silent for a long moment, processing the horrific implication. A serial poisoner operating with impunity inside a top hospital. He looked from the screen to Sarah's face. "Why didn't you bring this to the command post?" "Because I don't know who to trust over there," she said, the words tumbling out. "I heard Director Thorne on the phone in the medical library. He was talking about the investigation unraveling, about the intern being the problem. He said without her, it's just circumstantial." The color drained from Vasquez's face. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't argue. He simply said, "Tell me exactly what you heard, word for word." She did. When she finished, Vasquez pulled out his own secure phone but didn't dial. He stared at it, then at her. "My direct chain of command goes to him. If what you're saying is true, any action I take through normal channels is compromised." He made a decision. "We need to get you and that data to someone outside his immediate orbit, the office of the Inspector General or the Deputy Director." "But the lockdown," Sarah said, "we can't get out." "There are always exits," Vasquez replied. "Follow me and bring that drive." They moved back into the hallway, but the calculus of the hospital had changed. Vasquez's radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice. "All points be advised. Subject of interest, Walker, Sarah, medical intern, is not in her designated secure location. Possible flight risk. Locate and detain for protective custody." The order was chillingly neutral, protective custody, but issued under Thorne's authority, it was a death sentence. Vasquez looked at her. "They just painted a target on you for everyone in the building. We can't trust anyone now." He led her to a janitor's closet, pulled out 2 sets of hospital-issue blue maintenance coveralls and caps. "Put these on, keep your head down." As they changed, he used a small tool to disable the GPS tracker in his own phone and radio. "We're off the grid, for now." Disguised, they entered a service elevator Vasquez accessed with a key from his pocket. "FBI master key," he explained. "Gets us to the sub-basement. There's a tunnel network for utilities that connects to the adjacent research building. It's not on the general lockdown order." As the elevator descended, Sarah asked the question burning in her mind. "Why do you believe me? You only have my word against the director of the FBI." Vasquez's jaw tightened. "Because the forensics on this case have felt wrong from the start. Too neat. The plan in the basement, the stolen nurse code, it's like a stage set. And because 2 hours ago, I requested the full financial profile for Alina Shaw, the nursing supervisor. The request was denied by the deputy director's office, citing operational security. You don't block a background check on a prime suspect unless you're afraid of what it will show." The elevator doors opened into a concrete corridor lined with pipes. It was hot and loud with the hum of machinery. They hurried down it, the tunnel stretching into darkness. "Where does this come out?" Sarah asked. "The Genomic Research Center. It has its own security, separate from the hospital. From there, we can get to a vehicle." They reached a heavy steel door. Vasquez punched a code into a keypad. It beeped red. He tried again. Red. "They've locked it down from the other side," he said, his voice grim. "Thorne must have extended the perimeter. He's sealing the building." They were trapped in the tunnel. Behind them, the way back to the hospital. Ahead, a locked door. And somewhere in the maze above, a network of federal agents now had orders to find Sarah Walker. Vasquez pulled out his service weapon, checking the magazine. "We're not waiting here." He turned back the way they came, but stopped at the sound of footsteps echoing down the concrete passage. Distant but moving fast, more than one person. He pushed Sarah into a recessed alcove housing a large water valve. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." He stepped out, weapon held low at his side, and moved toward the sound of the footsteps, placing himself between them and her hiding spot. Sarah crouched in the dark, the USB drive clenched in her sweaty hand. She heard voices now, amplified by the tunnel. "Vasquez, what are you doing down here? We got a bolo on the Intern." It was another agent. Sarah recognized the voice from earlier in the command post. "Checking the perimeter seals," Vasquez replied, his tone casual. "The order said she might try to flee the building. This is a blind spot." "Right, well, we're sweeping all levels. The director wants her found. Says she might be in danger from the actual perp might try to run. You seen anything?" "Nothing down here, it's clear." A pause. "Okay, we'll check the research wing side. The door's locked, but we've got the override." Sarah's breath caught. They were coming this way. Vasquez had bought her seconds at most. She heard the agent's footsteps resume, coming closer. Vasquez was walking with them, talking about search grids, his voice fading slightly as if he was falling behind. Then, a loud metallic clang echoed through the tunnel, followed by a curse. "Damn pipe, sorry, didn't see it in the dark." It was Vasquez, creating a distraction. It was now or never. Sarah burst from the alcove and ran, not toward the locked research wing door, but back into the heart of the hospital's sub-basement, into the deeper maze of machinery. The footsteps behind her erupted into shouts. "She's here in the tunnel, moving east." A flashlight beam swept past her, illuminating steam bursting from a pipe joint. She ducked behind a massive boiler, her lungs burning. She heard Vasquez's voice, sharp with authority. "I'll flank her. You two take the main conduit line." It was a lie. He was giving her a vector. She scrambled in the direction opposite the main conduit line, finding a narrow metal ladder bolted to the wall. It led up to a hatch. She climbed, her arms shaking. At the top, she threw her shoulder against the heavy hatch. It budged, then swung open with a groan, spilling dim light down on her. She pulled herself up and found herself in another hallway, but this one was clean, quiet, and lined with numbered doors. She was in the hospital's secure pharmaceutical research wing, a place she had no access to. An alarm began to blare softly somewhere down the hall. The open hatch must have triggered a silent alert. At the far end of the corridor, a door opened. A man in a white lab coat stepped out, frowning at the alarm panel on the wall. He turned and saw her. It was Dr. Robert Evans, the chief of medicine, the man who had scoffed at her theory in front of the FBI. For a moment, they just stared at each other. He looked from her disheveled maintenance coveralls to the open hatch in the floor, to the panic in her eyes. The blaring alarm filled the space between them. Then slowly, he raised a finger to his lips. SHHH. He stepped back into his lab, held the door open, and gestured for her to come inside. Sarah hesitated for a split second at the lab threshold. Every instinct told her to run, but Dr. Evans's gesture was urgent, not threatening. The alarm was still blaring. She darted inside and he closed the door, silencing the sound. The lab was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, neat, ordered, lit by the cool glow of chromatography screens. Under the desk, "Now," Evans whispered, his voice taut. She scrambled beneath a large metal desk as he moved to the room's computer terminal. Seconds later, heavy footsteps pounded past the lab door, voices shouting commands, fatting down the hall. Evans waited, then let out a long breath. "They're gone. For now." Sarah crawled out. "Why did you help me?" "Because you were right," he said, his face etched with a profound exhaustion. "And I was wrong, catastrophically wrong. I dismissed you to protect the hospital's reputation, and in doing so, I allowed a predator to continue operating. My pride almost cost a woman her life. But the FBI, Director Thorne, are not what they seem, he interrupted. I've been monitoring the investigation from in here. The network access in this lab is on a separate, secure line. I saw the order to detain you for protective custody issued under the director's authorization code. Then I saw a second, conflicting order, encrypted and sent to a different bureau channel, requesting your immediate extraction from the building. Someone inside is playing a very deep game. He turned a monitor toward her. On it was a real-time feed of the hospital's security command center. Director Thorne stood, arms crossed, watching a wall of screens. He looked calm, too calm for a man whose wife was dying. You think he's involved? Sarah asked, her voice small. I think, Evans said slowly, that we are seeing a performance. The question is who the audience is. He tapped a few keys, pulling up another window. I've been analyzing the toxin data the FBI released to our lab. The aconitine signature is correct, but the concentration curve is mathematically perfect. Too perfect for biological metabolism. It fits a model of administration, not the messy reality of a human body breaking down a poison. This data was likely synthesized or heavily manipulated. The implication was staggering. The primary forensic evidence, the very proof of the crime, might be fabricated. But why, Sarah asked, why fake evidence of your own wife's poisoning? To justify the lockdown, a new voice said from the doorway. Agent Vasquez stood there, his suit smudged with tunnel grime, his weapon holstered. He held up a hand as Sarah flinched. It's okay. I lost the other agents. They think you doubled back toward the main hospital. He looked at Dr. Evans. You have a bypass on that door alarm. Useful. Vasquez stepped fully inside. I just got a secure ping from a source outside the chain of command. The Office of the Inspector General has been running a parallel classified investigation into Director Thorne for 9 months. Suspicion of illegal surveillance, evidence tampering, and unauthorized covert actions. They had no concrete proof until today. The lockdown, the confiscated evidence, the manufactured forensic trail, it's all part of a stress test. A stress test, Sarah echoed. To see who would break and how, Vasquez said. The OIG theorized Thorne was using bureau assets to settle personal vendettas or silence threats. They needed an incident so severe, so personal, that he would activate his entire illicit apparatus. So they gave him one. Sarah felt the room tilt. They gave him his wife's poisoning. No, Vasquez said. Margaret Thorne is not poisoned. She has a very rare, very real autoimmune condition called Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome. It mimics the symptoms of aconitine poisoning almost exactly. The OIG, with the help of a few trusted individuals inside this hospital, ensured her initial diagnostic path was subtly misdirected. They planted the idea of the zebra to make the eventual discovery of poison believable. They needed Thorne to believe his wife was a target, so he would react. Dr. Evans sank into a chair. I was one of those individuals. I was approached by the Deputy Attorney General. My role was to ensure the diagnostic failure was credible, to lead the team down the wrong path, and to observe Thorne's response from the inside. I did not know they would involve an intern. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with remorse. You were never supposed to be in danger. You were never supposed to see the real pattern. You were an uncontrolled variable. Sarah's mind reeled. Her discovery, her conviction, her fear, all of it had been orchestrated. She was a pawn in a federal power game. The plant in the basement, she asked. Planted by OIG assets, Vasquez confirmed. The stolen nurse code, fabricated digital trail. The goal was to make Thorne believe a rival agency or a criminal element was targeting him, forcing him to use his hidden resources to find the poisoner and cover it up. Instead, he moved to control the narrative, fabricate evidence, and frame a fall guy, likely Alina Shaw, the nursing supervisor, whose background they could distort. And he moved to silence the one person who could unravel the fiction, you. So what happens now? Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. Now, Vasquez said, checking his watch. The trap closes. The OIG has been recording everything. Thorne's illegal lockdown orders, his manipulation of evidence, his orders to detain you. They have what they need. An extraction team is en route to this location to secure you and Dr. Evans. Thorne will be taken into custody before the night is over. As if on cue, a soft chime came from the computer. Evans looked at the screen. The treatment for Lambertine has been administered to Margaret Thorne. Her vitals are stabilizing. She's going to recover. The reality of it settled in the quiet room. A woman would live. A powerful man would fall. A conspiracy would be exposed. And Sarah Walker, the first-week intern, had been the accidental key that turned the lock. 20 minutes later, a discreet team from the office of the Inspector General entered the lab. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic arrests in the hallway. Sarah and Dr. Evans were escorted out through a private garage to a waiting, unmarked vehicle. As they drove away, Sarah saw a lone figure standing at a hospital upper window looking down. It was Aris Thorne. He was not on a phone. He was just watching, his expression inscrutable from a distance. He already knew the game was over. The public story would be complex. It would involve a tragic misdiagnosis, a brilliant intern, and the heroic work of federal investigators to uncover a shocking plot against the director's family. The truth, that the entire poisoning was an elaborate sting operation, would be sealed in classified files, likely forever. Sarah gave her official statement to the OIG over 3 long days. She was offered a new identity, a transfer to any medical school in the country, a full scholarship. She declined it all. She asked only for the chance to finish her internship at a different hospital under her own name. 3 months later, a quiet article appeared on page 6 of the Washington Post. Former FBI Director Aris Thorne resigns, cites family health concerns. No charges were ever publicly filed. In the world of shadow wars, removal is often the only verdict. On her first day at her new hospital, Sarah Walker walked the corridors with a different kind of awareness. She knew that truth was often a layered thing, that heroes and villains could wear the same suit, and that sometimes the most important detail was not in the lab work, but in the hands of the person holding the report. She had learned to trust her eyes, but to question the story everyone else was telling. And as for the other patients in that ICU, the ones with the minor, unexplained lab blips, their records were quietly reviewed. No evidence of poisoning was ever found. Their anomalies remained just that, anomalies. But Sarah would always wonder, were they part of the sting too? Or were they just the random noise of human biology, the background static against which a deadly fiction had been written? She would never know for sure. The final, surprising detail came in a sealed envelope delivered to her apartment 6 weeks after the event. Inside was a single, typewritten line on plain paper. "Your clarity was the signal in the noise. Thank you." It was unsigned. There was no return address. She never discovered who sent it, but she kept it, a reminder that in the heart of the deepest deception, something real had been seen, and it had mattered. That note and the entire ordeal left Sarah with an understanding far beyond her medical textbooks. She had learned that the most dangerous poison is not always a toxin. It is the assumption that the system is working, that the authorities are truthful, and that the obvious story is the real one. The case of the FBI director's poisoned wife, a case that never officially existed, reveals a deeper truth about power and perception. In the end, it wasn't about a rare plant or a secret plot. It was about the space between what we are told and what we can see for ourselves. A first-week intern with no rank and no authority became the most important person in the room because she chose to look at the raw data, not the conclusion written above it. In a world of increasing complexity, where narratives are constructed and information is weaponized, the ability to see the signal in the noise is not just a skill, it is a form of quiet resistance. Sarah Walker did not set out to topple a powerful man or expose a conspiracy. She simply asked a question that no one else would ask. What if the experts are wrong? This story, like all the best ones, is about the moment an individual decides to trust their own eyes. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is preserved not by the people at the top of the pyramid, but by the ones at the very bottom who are still looking up with clear vision. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of paying attention, then do something simple but significant. Hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you tell the algorithm that stories with depth, with mystery, with real human stakes matter. You help ensure that the next time a signal hides in the noise, there will be an audience ready to listen for it. Thank you for watching.